Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Nick Naber, and he's in New York right now. You were introduced to me by his name Daniel Herr? I only know him through
Da-
Instagram. How do you guys know each other?
So,
Might as well give him a shout out.
yeah, so Daniel and I have known each other since like 2014. I used to run a website called the Coastal Post,
Hmm.
and a friend of mine from graduate school interviewed him for the Coastal Post, and then we just ended up becoming friends over time. I would do studio visits with him, he'd do studio visits with me, and then he recently moved to LA.
Oh, okay. What? Tell me about this publication. It's a print or online?
It was an online publication that I started with my friend Francesca Cazzone
Okay.
in 2014, and it started out as a Tumblr blog, and then eventually became like a fully fledged website that did studio visits with artists across the world, along with profiles and sometimes reviews of exhibitions.
Interesting. So then was it like you guys like the website, the organization, what was the name of it again, sorry?
The Coastal Post.
The Coastal Post. So the Coastal Post would come and do studio visits, or was it a messaging board for people to find each other?
So we had an East Coast and a West Coast group of contributors, and they would find people that they found interesting, and then once every season or twice every season, they would go and interview whoever they wanted to interview.
Oh,
So
cool.
sometimes people, were in Brooklyn and they interview Brooklyn artists, or they were at a residency and they interview people at Banff or wherever they were. So uh, it was a pretty open publication. I
I'm,
mean,
I'm
basically, all I
Go ahead. Sorry, I hate interrupting on online or on Zoom because it's so disruptive. Go ahead.
So basically, I wrote for it for quite some time, and then my friend Francesca, basically stepped back from it, and I became the editor in chief, and then I stopped doing interviews. I think in 2019, and basically just helped maintain the website and the Instagram presence,
So
and did the logistics.
are you guys still doing it or
No,
no?
after doing it by myself since 2019 and trying to like keep the studio practice, I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
I need some more space in my life. And the Coastal Post was great for while it existed, and it really connected me with a lot of artists. And I think it also gave a lot of artists their first real profile or
Yeah, yeah.
interaction of somebody writing about what they're doing. And I'm really thankful for that. And I've, over the years, a lot of people that I didn't actually know but edited
Hmm.
their interview have been like, hey, you're Nick Naber, you ran the Coastal Post. And it's really like rewarding for me that there is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
sort of life that happens beyond just
The
the internet.
project. Yeah. Well, that's really cool, and I'm actually starting to see why Daniel recommended you to me because I mean we're sort of kindred spirits in that sense. Um, so okay, so then you're in New York. Did you grow up out there? Where are you from, and when did you start to really get a sense of like, oh, art is something that I'm gonna have to deal with for the rest of my life. Sorry to phrase it like that. No,
Yeah,
art. Okay, you get it. Go
it's like a
ahead.
multi-part question. I mean, I can give you the long or the short answer.
I
It's
mean,
up
we
to
got
you.
an hour. Whichever.
So, yeah, I mean, I'll give you the abbreviated long answer. So,
Okay.
originally, I thought I wanted to be an architect, and I started out in architecture school in the first
Hmm.
studio program, and I was like, this is not for me. I'm not interested in building something that stands. I don't really care about this. But I was very interested in the history and theory of architecture. And because I had so many credits, I ended up getting a minor in architectural history and theory.
Hmm.
And then I switched to the art department in undergrad. And basically, by my last year, all of my professors, both in the architecture department and in the fine art department, were like, we usually tell people to wait to go to graduate school, but we think you're on this path that you should apply and see what will happen. And so I applied, and I got into Pratt, and
Hmm.
I decided to go to Pratt. And so in 2010, I packed up from Wisconsin and moved to Brooklyn, and I've been here ever since.
Oh, cool. So, all right. Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to, well, actually, I wanted to comment that that we have. Now, I see the architectural side in your work, right? The which when you were recommended to me, I thought it was interesting because I'm also very much interested in all of that. Um, and I see you. We were both standing in front of drafting tables, but
Yeah.
New York, I just got mine, and I'm like drawing nonsense and posting it, and no one cares. But it's
I
all good.
mean, that's
I'm
a
just
lot of art making.
yeah, no. But okay, so then tell me a little bit about New York. It sounds like you. When did you move out there? And I mean Brooklyn's particularly, right? But when did you move out there? That's one of the things that I'm kind of curious because like New York is a big black hole in my knowledge base. So
Mhm.
that is one of the reasons that I'm starting to interview people out there. So yeah, what do you think the scene was like? What is it like? What do you like about it? What is it's a
Yeah,
another multi-part question. My questions are open ended so that you can talk for as long as you want.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I've had a long history with New York. I had
Uh,
a cousin that lived here, and so starting in 2003, I would make yearly or bi-yearly trips out here, and so I had always
mm,
had sort of a understanding of the city from being a teenager onwards. And
yeah.
moving here in 2010, unfortunately, my cousin decided to end his life. And
Oh
so,
no,
I
sorry.
moved out here in 2010, and he was no longer here. And it was a big move. It was a move because I didn't have that person here anymore to,
Yeah, yeah,
create a community with and know. And so really graduate school became a a place where I met a lot of the artist friends that I have still to this day. And it also was a real like learning curve for me because I grew up in Wisconsin and I went to the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. And so I had sort of, lived within the Midwest until I was 23. And moving to New York, shifts a lot, and
yeah, yeah,
it's a culture shock, and it's a difference in life and everything. And to answer the other part of your question, the scene in that time in 2010, 2000 to 2010 to 2012, while I was in graduate school, was really about school and really about
yeah.
making work. I wasn't really concerned with the gallery scene or what was going on. I should mention that I did in 2010, I was recommended to do an installation with Pat Steer, and I ended up, working for Pat Steer for that 2 weeks and getting to know the gallery. And I ended up interning there, and that sort of turned into like the day job that I have now. They recommended me to a different gallery when they closed. And
Mm.
so I've been, in the gallery world working as a day job while also, maintaining my studio practice.
Are you in like what do you mind saying what gallery it is or just
Sure. Yeah, I work at Van Doren Waxter, which is on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and they specialize in uh, estates and foundations of artists that are post-war, typically California artists like Richard Devencorn, John McLaughlin, Alan Shields, Hedda Stern. Those are kind
okay.
of our bigger estates and foundations.
Interesting. Well, okay, then you actually are probably pretty qualified to give me an insight into or give me some answers of the questions that I have. So, do you have any ties to like an artist run scene out there? I'm always, I mean, usually that's kind of where people start, right? To getting opportunities to show. I have the sense, and it could be entirely mistaken. It's just my assumption that because of the prices, that kind of a scene is harder to maintain. I've spoken to a few, or I've spoken to, um, what's her name, Jacqueline Cedar, who runs Good Naked, and it's interesting. She says that she started off in an apartment. Now she uses her apartment as a showing room. Can you are you familiar at all with this, like with the more scene, or are you just so embedded more in the like the gallery spaces? Because that obviously is your work, so it makes sense if you don't like interact with the more community based projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, New York is such a gigantic melting pot of different like scenes, and it's not like necessarily the scene that I function in.
Mm.
But it is, I have lots of friends that have done like Tiger Strikes Asteroid or Transmitter or Ortega y Gasset. Like all of those are artist run spaces, and
Mm.
they do a great service to the artist community here in New York, because it is very difficult to
Yeah, yeah,
find a space in which to show your work, and they really are doing fantastic work. I mean, all of them. I mean, Underdonk as well. Like they do open calls for exhibitions. Some of them do a flat file, and they
mm.
run different programs. And because they're run by artists, those artists also curate, group shows or two-person shows or one-person shows. And so, somebody that maybe gets overlooked in the greater, commercial art world still has an opportunity to have an exhibition at a space like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's like it's such an imperative part of the fabric of New York City and the art scene, in Brooklyn and in the city.
Yeah. Would you say it's concentrated in places like Brooklyn, in like the it versus Manhattan? Because I would imagine, I would imagine like Chelsea and all of that area, which I barely recently discovered where that is, but it's like such an iconic art center, that my relationship to New York is that I've only been in the city like two times. As a kid, I used to go to the TWA, what's it called, terminal, the international one, because I would
Mm-hmm.
travel from Miami to Italy, and so one time my dad was like, "Oh, let's take a tour of New York." And then later on, I was dating someone and I went out there. So, like, even experience wise and like the feelings of the city, like I get it just from being there a little bit. But it's definitely foreign to me. The closest experience I have to that is living in walkable cities like Rome or Florence, right? But it's like it's interesting. So is like Manhattan too expensive for that kind of thing? Do you think, or are there spaces in that realm?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think most of the spaces end up being in Brooklyn, but that's also because that's where the artists are, in
Yeah,
Brooklyn and Queens and the South Bronx. I mean, it's a very lucky person that is able to afford a studio in the city,
yeah, yeah, for
that's
sure.
not doing a residency or something. Um, I don't know all of the spaces. It's possible that there is artist run space in the city. It's not going to probably be in Tribeca or in Chinatown or the Lower East Side or Chelsea, because all of those spaces have become a commercial gallery center, and so
Yeah.
I would doubt very much that there's a lot of artist run spaces in those areas. But again, I'm not an expert on that.
No, no, and we can go into your expertise, because I mean, I'm definitely like I I've been in LA long enough that I have a pretty decent handle on how that scene is out here. It's the way I would describe it is just taking somebody else. Matt Stromberg was the one who said it. Is that those are like little communities that overlap, and but they're not necessarily all tied in together. There's a thing called the Bendix building out here, which has a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of them. It's also funny because they're all friends, but they all kind of talk smack about each other's organizations, which is going to happen in any community, in any scene. You're going to be more proud of your space than the one next door. Um, but yeah, it does seem like it's a community that gives people an opportunity who like to do work that maybe isn't even commercial, which is nice because I know some people. I think Christopher Reyes, I just interviewed recently. He was saying that I mean, he's represented by Charlie James, but he likes to. He just curated a show at As Is LA, which I think was what he was saying was that it was his opportunity to sort of do the kind of work that Charlie is not necessarily interested in because it's not commercially viable towards his. I mean, I hope I'm not paraphrasing it in a negative way, but the idea being that, like, when you have collectors, they have a specific interest, and maybe the opportunities present themselves outside of that side to do more, like, less commercially focused work. Like I sometimes I like to do like disposable things, right? Like things that are just an installation temporarily, and then I'm going to throw them out because I don't want to store them. Which I think that those provide those opportunities. But can we get what I'm less and just now starting to get a little bit better versed in is more the commercial side of things, right? In LA. So can you, like, what's your take on the scene? Obviously, it's one of the biggest art markets in the world. I imagine Manhattan is the center of it because there is so much money there to begin with, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it in a lot of ways, New York is still very much the center of a lot of things, and
Yeah, yeah,
it's also a place where people stop by. Like
yeah, yeah.
just living here, I have friends that stop here. It's like I haven't seen them in a decade, but at some point they're going to get to New York, or somebody from Europe. At some point they're going to get to New York.
Yeah.
And I think there's just this concentration here because, after the war, artists moved here, or during the war, they were refugees from the Nazis, and they moved here, and they brought surrealism, and then it moves into Abex, and the art world became centered in New York.
Abex? What's Abex?
Abex, abstract expressionism.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
Um, yeah, no problem. And so, it continues to be that way. I mean, there's also a real history here of, important dealers. You have Paula Cooper, you have Matthew Marks, you have Pace. All of these galleries have been around for a long time, and so they have deep investments within the city, and they have deep investments with the artists that they show. And they've also started moving out to LA. You have a Matthew
Yeah.
Marks out there. You have other outposts of New York galleries that have moved out there because the scene is also changing in LA. It's a
Yeah,
much
yeah.
more serious scene than it was, when I first started going out to LA in like 2014. You had Blum and Poe, and now it's just called Blum, and you had LA Louvre, and you had a handful of galleries, commercial galleries that were, the big galleries there. And now Hauser's out there. Everybody's sort of like has a space there. And I
Yeah.
think, as the world becomes more democratized because of the internet, it's very different. Like when I went to graduate school, Instagram didn't exist, and it was still the like, oh, you have to go to Yale or Columbia or you're never going to have a career. And
That's
I think that
very
that has
interesting.
definitely, waned over the years because there's so much more exposure that people can have through, podcasts like this, or through
Yeah.
Instagram, or, any of these other means that just weren't around, 14 years ago or whatever, and so I think that also changes it because it's like, yeah, New York is still like the place, but it's like you can go see a good show in St. Louis or in Nashville or in Austin. Like all of these places have at least a couple of galleries that are the same standard as a New
Yeah.
York gallery or an LA gallery. And so I think that in a lot of ways the commercial art world has expanded, and also, like having gone through COVID, it sort of shows like people can sort of be anywhere,
Yeah, yeah.
and they can, zoom in, or they can, do it over email. And I think that has also changed a lot of the dynamics in the commercial art world where, a lot of people don't go to Miami anymore because they're like, why the hell would I want to go to Miami Beach to go to the big fair? I can just get the
No.
PDF. I know what an Ed Bruchet looks like. I don't need to see it in person. and write a check, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that also, like, that aspect of the art world is really changing. And you can tell, you know, lots of galleries are doing less art fairs because it doesn't really matter as much as it did anymore, because things are broader than they were
Yeah.
ever before.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that specific context because it's interesting to hear a New Yorker acknowledge sort of how much LA has changed in that time frame. You know, because it really has. It is.
It's a
It's
very different art city than it was. It's very, very
a hundred
different.
percent.
Within 10 years, it's
Yeah.
a completely different scene.
And I think one of the things that I always cite is the Pacific Standard Time shows. Are you familiar with those?
Hmm.
It was like a effort for. I mean, I if you listen to the show, you've heard me explain it, but I'll give the explanation again. It was a series of shows that were just sort of to validate what was going on here at the same time, because we're like, you know, in the time periods we're speaking of, like, you know, Ruche and all of that, and Chris Burden. It was basically celebrating what was happening here during the time that we tend to think of like the, you know, the crazy years in New York, right? And it's also interesting to think about, like, I think that the geography of the city facilitated itself, especially, you know, what you were mentioning about all the Europeans that moved here after the Second World War, or moved to New York after the Second World War. New York, having lived in walkable cities, like New York is definitely one of the very few places that you can get that experience. I mean, Chicago too is close. It's a little bit smaller, I would say. It feels smaller.
Definitely.
Yeah, but yeah, it's. I feel like one of the reasons that LA has been kind of held back for so long is that we're all in isolated pods, right? Whereas like New York is inherently a more social city. Although people are very social here, it's not like they don't have that like East Coast vibe where they're a little they're less abrasive, as I would say. As someone who's from Miami, I'm not calling out just New York.
No, LA is a much more laid back
Yeah,
situation. I mean, I think that, you know, in New York, it's easy because it's like, oh, I can go to 10 openings in one night
yeah, yeah,
because it's 3 blocks apart. You know, in
yeah,
LA, you can't go to 10 openings in one night. You have to be much more considerate about, you know, how you spend your time. And there's probably a lot more planning as to, like, hey, I'm going to meet you at
yeah,
Varden, and, you know, then we can go to Deitch or something, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Yeah, and also you mentioned Deitch. That's in or that's in Hollywood, which like we mostly try to avoid. I have been getting, I do get out there to check out shows. Luckily, there's a lot to see it within that. There's a density there. They even have
Mm-hmm.
maps at the galleries that you can check out. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I also like to think of it in terms of like when I was in Florence, I felt like that city itself was very much rainy and introverted and contemplative, and and then when you go to Rome, like it's like, hey, let's get the fuck out of here. You know, like it was like you could see the different cultural aspects, especially because back then distances were much larger than they are now, right? Speaking,
Mm-hmm.
going back to what you were saying about the internet democratizing things, like just being highways have democratized things and made cities less isolated from themselves. But in this country, they're so far apart, like LA and New York, that I feel like, I don't know, New York, like LA, it's so easy to just fuck off and like you know, not socialize and just get completely stuck in into your own practice hole, and then just like emerge a little bit. Whereas like New York, it seems like might be a little bit of a healthier dynamic where you can just step outside and be around people. Like I go through I go through periods where like weeks where I don't even talk because I work from home, where I don't talk to anybody, which is like so LA. I'll leave the house and stuff, but like, you know, it's a there's a loneliness or there's an isolation here that I think that a city like Florence or New York doesn't have, which makes it feel more vibrant. I do remember feeling the energy of being in New York and just being like, yeah, I remember this, you know. So okay, so then it sounds like so your space you said is in the upper west side. You said the one
Upper
that you
East
work at,
Side.
upper east
Yeah.
side. Difference between Chelsea, upper east side, like upper west side. I mean, like I'm literally completely clueless about New York. So is it all pretty much just ritzy? Is there one part that's ritzier than the other? Like, where are the most rich New Yorkers living versus, and how do those galleries sit adjacent to those communities so that they can serve them? Is I guess do you follow my question?
I don't think that anybody in a commercial gallery has any concern about the community that they're in. I can tell you that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I think there are very few that really give a shit about that.
Okay.
I will say, the Upper East Side is really is like one of the wealthiest areas of New York City. It is
Okay.
like, if you ever watch Broad City, it literally is that. Like, I don't want to go up there. Nobody wants to go up there. There's nothing to do up there. It's
Okay.
like very, very fancy. Like, it's a completely different place than
Fascinating.
downtown.
Okay.
Um, the Upper East Side is home to galleries like mine. Uh, the original Gagosian is up there. Minution is up there. Aquavella, which is one of the oldest galleries in the city, is up there. It's a lot of secondary market or very high value galleries that are in typically brownstones or old mansions,
Whoa.
and
Okay.
they work. They work with material that is very rarefied. Like Craig Starr does exhibitions of artist work that is like unknown. It's usually like their early work. So he'll have like a show of Eva Hess, and it'll be drawings that nobody has ever seen because they're like incredibly rare. Or you have galleries like Minution. He was a billionaire, like Wall Street guy, and he's like, oh, I'll just put on a de Kooning show, and it's like museum quality de Kooning paintings that are $3 or $4 million or more, obviously, and he can put a show on like that. Or oh, David Hammons, he won't work with anybody, but he decided to work with Minution and gave him like a retrospective show. So that's sort
Wow.
of the Upper East Side, and Chelsea has sort of become like the gallery tower district. David Zwirner has a tower, Pace has a tower,
What do you mean
Gagosian
by
has
What do you mean by
like a
tower? It's
literal tower. Like they built
that's
themselves a tower. Like
and it's all
Pace's, I think
gallery. It's
yeah,
all
it's like a
gallery.
10. It's a 10 floor. Like Pace's, I think 10 floors and a
Uh,
terrace and like all this stuff. And Hauser just built like a museum space that's nicer than the Museum of Modern Art. Like
wow.
so Chelsea has become like blue chip mega gallery gigantic spaces. And then
Wow.
Tribeca is now like where you can go and like happen upon something, and it isn't like this massive gallery. You have smaller galleries like Deanna Evans or um, Delhi or 1969, like these smaller galleries that show emerging artists or mid-career artists. But then they also, PPOW is down there, and uh, Chart. There's a ton of galleries down there. Um, Andrew Krebs. There's a ton of galleries in Tribeca, and then you can walk over
Wow.
to Chinatown, and then it's like David Fearman, Lyles and King, Oxer Klein, 56 Henry. Like all of those galleries are there, and then you can go to the Lower East Side, and you have Mackenzie Fine Art. You have My Pet Ram, Europa.
As you get
There's a
down to
ton of galleries.
no, that sounds amazing. And first of all, I gotta send Daniel a thank you because this is exactly what I wanted to talk about to somebody. So as you're getting lower down, right, to when you get to the lower east side, does the tier of gallery, like can you just like geographically see that at the we're going from like super high tier original Gagosian to like more mid to lower tier galleries? Is that am I?
They're
It,
mixed.
they're
They're
mixed.
mixed
Okay.
because like Zwerner owns a gallery in Tribeca called 52 Walker Street,
Okay.
which has an emphasis on African American art. James Cohen has a space there. You know, PPOW, those are major galleries. You know, those are like
Yeah.
definite like blue chip galleries. But then, you know, interspersed, there are other smaller galleries. So it really, you know, it's dependent on what they're showing. You
Yeah.
know, it really, you know, you can go into PPOW and it's a David Wojnarowicz show, and then next door it's somebody you've never heard of, you know, and that's sort of what's nice about Tribeca. I mean, you're never going to happen in on anything in Chelsea that you don't already know. You're going to be like, oh, look, there's a Jenny Holzer show. Oh, okay, now there's a David Hockney show at Pace, and oh, there's Kelty Ferris. You know, like you're not going to discover anything new in Chelsea anymore because it's
Yeah.
all just big galleries.
What? Tell me a little bit more about these towers, because I mean, over here we have spaces that, or like places that are full of like galleries and stuff, like mostly artist-run spaces. But I don't think there's anything quite like that. Just like a tower with 10 floors, and every floor is just the gallery space. So it's like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, like Pace built their own tower, you know,
Uh,
and they have a library and they have, you know, multiple floors of exhibitions, private viewing rooms. I mean, I would say it's probably something akin to the Hauser and Wirth in LA, you know,
okay,
where it's just like, but it's just vertical because
it's
it's New York
stacked.
City, you
Yeah.
know, and so it's like, you know, there's offices and they've consolidated all of their spaces in New York City, besides 125 Newberry, because that's Arnie Glimsher's like pet project space in
Hmm.
Tribeca. Everything is all in that tower, and Pace Prints is next door, but not in the tower because they still have a little autonomy from Pace. And you know, Lehman Maupin built a small tower. Like all of these galleries are consolidating their multiple spaces in the city into one. Um,
It's just the amount of money is so involved in doing that is so staggering, which like still kind of, it just shows me how like small LA is. And I mean, not in a negative derogatory way, but it's like it really is like small fry compared to these, cuz I mean, the amount of money they have to be making to be able to build these places, right? Like it's, yeah, that is pretty interesting to me. Do you like those spaces? Like, do you enjoy? Are they conducive to a? I mean, I obviously don't want to like burn bridges in your career, so you don't. I'm not looking for juice, but like, as an experience, is it cool to go to like one of these towers and just have this many floors? It sounds like it just feels like a museum, like maybe going to LACMA or something like that.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's not like especially scintillating, you
okay,
know. You know, it's like, yeah, again, you know, it's like, okay, it's a David Hockney show. I mean, I know
yeah,
what to expect from that. I'm not going to like go in there and be like, oh my God, it's the best David Hockney show that I've ever seen. This, you know, the 70s are over. You know,
okay,
it's
fair
not,
enough.
you know, it's not going to be like fantastic. I mean, it's impressive. I mean, you
Yeah,
go into
yeah,
the Hauser and Wirth Tower and you're like, oh my God, it's cleaner than the Museum of Modern Art and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
bigger. And,
yeah.
you know, they're showing these, you know, like they had a show of Eva Hess and they got a loan from the Guggenheim, you know, like
Uh,
only galleries of that scale can do something like that, you know? And so if you're into spectacle in that way, it's great. You know, for me,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
sort of like I don't really go down there unless it's like, oh, they have a Louise Nevelson show. Well, I'm gonna make a trip to Pace to see that because I like her. But I'm
yeah,
not
yeah,
gonna, you know, I don't need to see, you know, a show of somebody that I can, you know, go to MoMA or the Met or something
yeah,
that's long dead. You know, it
yeah.
doesn't really do anything for me.
Well, what does stuff for you? Where do you like? What part of town do you end up gravitating towards based on the programming of the galleries there?
So, I mean, I typically will start, you know, on the Lower East Side to get off at East Broadway, and
Uh huh.
I'll weave my way through, and then I'll make my way to Chinatown. I'll have lunch, have some dim sum, and then
Nice.
then I'll do Tribeca. I mean, I don't hit every single gallery, but I
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
you know, I visit my friends that own galleries, or if I have friends that have a show, I definitely like make sure that, you know, I'm hitting those spaces, saying hello. and seeing that stuff. I mean, that's more interesting to me because it's also much more approachable. You know, you walk into Gagosian or Zwerner. I mean, nobody's going to even acknowledge that you're there. You know,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
open the
yeah.
door and they're like behind a 10-foot desk. So, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's the same as going into going into a museum. Like nobody
Yeah,
gives a
that's what it
shit that
sounds
you're
like.
there.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. But it's still mind blowing. I mean, for me, I just haven't. I didn't even know they existed. So this is like
I mean,
you've
you guys
brought me.
have that gigantic Hauser and Wirth space with the fucking restaurant in it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
but
insane.
no, it's insane, and but it in terms of like scale, like a tower just seems bigger to me. But I could be wrong. You know, like and it just seems like Hauser and Wirth, I guess it seems like you could have. It just seems like an easier build, you know. But I don't know. I'm not in construction. All right, I want to get into a little bit of your practice because I do feel like we have overlapping interests, and but I do appreciate all of this. Like obviously, you see how little I know about New York, and I don't know how many people in LA are better versed on New York. I don't know.
I mean, I'm only one person, and I'm a very like specific curmudgeonly person. So,
Yeah, but
you
we
know,
love curmudgeons. No, but okay, so yeah, tell me a little bit of your practice. You like I got the architect part of your roots, and I definitely see because I'm also like very much interested in perspective and whatnot. And I mean, not that you're doing perspective drawings, but your drawings are notably architectural. Am I? Is that
hmm
is that fair?
yeah, absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, the work has really been architectural since about 2008.
Mm.
I really um, have been working, you know, through I would say since I was a kid, I'm still concerned with the same ideas. Like the work is, you know, probably more specific now.
Mm.
Um, but you know, I've always been concerned with space. I've always been concerned with, you know, the idea of metaphor of architecture as the human body or human emotion. Like all of that is still like very present for me and is present in the work that I make.
Yeah.
And you know, the work now has become, uh, I would say, much more abstract than it had been previously. A lot of the work, I would say, from about 2013 to about 2018 started out as sketches of things that I had seen in the city or when I traveled. I wouldn't sketch on site. I would remember that thing, sketch it in my sketchbook, and then extrapolate from there, you know, the compositions that I was working on. And now I really, you know, it's sort of like I do a lot of writing in my sketchbook and I do like small thumbnails and I make, you know, determinations as to what I want to have happen.
Mm.
And then it's a call and response, basically. I just like go into, you know, the meditative trance of making art and I don't really think about what it connects to from the world anymore,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's still there.
I don't know about you, but one of the ways that I deal with a blank page is I like to have a strategy, you know, and then that way I can just disconnect from the whole like making decision process or having the decisions already predetermined. But anyway, um, what? So okay, so then material wise, are you are you a drawer? Would you identify as a drawer, or do you
Yeah, I
paint?
mean, I identify as a drawer. You know, I've been basically working on, you know, works on paper for forever. And
Yeah.
then recently, like this piece that's behind me is a prepared panel that I then draw on and then put watercolor on. And then I seal it with varnish and it is considered like an actual painting
Yeah.
because you don't need to frame it, you don't need to put it behind glass. And so I've been testing um, this medium from Daniel Smith to make the ground on these panels to see what I can get from that. So I'm kind of in this mode of like exploring what the material can do and like how I can move not beyond the works on paper, but how I can shift the material of what I've been doing.
Hmm. But was still with the same kind of aesthetic and still the same drawing strategies, but just drawing on different materials to make them less work on paper. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, it's not to make less work on paper. It's really to see, what kind of constraints there are, or if there are constraints with this new way of making work. And really, I've always been interested in eschewing like what you should do on certain materials.
Yeah.
Like for a very long time, I made large scale drawings on canvas
Mm.
that were made with chalk
Yeah, yeah.
or coffee on top of the canvas and then chalk on top of it. So they're obviously not archival. And that was a long period of work that I made. I think that because I do identify as a drawer, like trying to push what the medium can do has always been very interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's we're a rare breed. The people that identify as drawers primarily. I have been bridging into painting a little bit, but it's still such a weird, like it's a different uh practice. The process is a different experience, right? Like it's less meditative for me, the painting. Whereas like I don't know, I get obsessed with cross hatching and whatnot, and I really like I don't know. I am interested in this idea of space because that is something that I approach as well. And I think that it's kind of hard to make work about architecture that isn't inherently about space. For me, I'm very interested in the subdivision of space, like and the arbitrariness of it, right? Like this entire room that I'm in could be like 2 inches to the left, and then also all the contents within it can be um, rearranged, right? And the feeling of it can be changed. So those are sort of the things that I'm interested in space. It sounds like you're dealing a little bit with the body. Can you talk a little bit more about that, like and the metaphor element of it, or is that too abstract and maybe more intuitive of a
No,
process
I
for
mean,
you?
I like to tell people that come for a studio visit, like I don't give any information
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
think, for me, it's really important on so many levels. We live in a society which people do not actually spend time with anything other than
yeah.
their phone.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, there is a great amount of joy in being with art and really investing in looking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to discuss obviously what I'm doing. I'm just saying this is, how I view work. Like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm slow and I take a lot of time to look at things before I make any sort of statement or questions about things. The work that I make, I think, is work that takes time. I think it's
Yeah,
work
yeah.
that also reveals itself over time, because in a lot of ways it is a stand-in for myself. It is a stand-in for my emotions. It is a stand-in for whatever it is that I'm going through at the time that I'm making it,
Uh,
consciously and subconsciously. And there is a quick look, which is, oh, this absolute perfection.
uh-huh.
Things look like they're proceeding back in space correctly, that there are, like all of these things seem like the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. But the longer that you look at the work, the more it sort of falls apart. There are elements of it where things don't really line up correctly. There are places where things have been overdrawn. There are
Mm-hmm.
places where I don't tape anything. And so it's all done by hand, where the watercolor has leaked into another spot, where things have plumed. And it's sort of this way of creating and ordering the world for me, into a sort of chaos that is the world, and then putting it into this very regimented, very perfect seeming space. But
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's not a real space. We don't know how big it is. There's no way to tell the scale,
Yeah, yeah,
and everything sort of falls apart over time, or you notice something different, or
yeah, yeah.
there's little jokes, and it's stupid art jokes, like watercolor. It's always about like preserving your whites. So a lot of the tops of my work have white preserved, which is not the way that you're supposed to preserve the white. You're supposed to preserve it for highlights.
Uh
But
huh.
it's sort of like a nod to the all of the YouTube videos that I watched to learn how to make watercolor, and it's stuff like that. And it's also like the ridiculousness of people not titling their works and calling works untitled. It's like, oh, you just spent, 40 hours on this. You can't even think about giving it a title. And so, there's a whole series of work that I did, I think, for 5 years that was called Untitled. And then in parentheses, there was a title because it's, these stupid like art jokes that probably only I find interesting.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like a Cliff's Notes version of what I think about and the things that I, am concerned with. I mean, I'm also really concerned with, the metaphor of society's power over the individual. I read a lot of Foucault, and like the, discipline and punish is like a, sort of Bible for me in a lot of ways. That architecture can be this place of liberation, but it can also force you to do specific things.
Yeah.
It makes you, if the ceiling is low, you want to be out of that space, and it pushes you forward, and tricks like that. I mean, that doesn't really show up in the work, but it is something that I find interesting, like the psychology of a space.
Mm. Definitely. Well, it's interesting. You're another. I literally this week's episode is called "Drawing is the Medium," conceptual abstraction. Which it sounds like we're the three of us, you, me, and John O'Connor, are sort of in this same space. His work, I mean, I don't think our work looks anything similar, but I do see some of this stuff when I look at your stuff that I'm like stuff that I recognize as interests of mine that I pursue uh, as well, just in a different. I think for me, there's a rhythmic element that I'm very much interested in, but the idea of architecture as like as propaganda is something that like I think that in the U.S. we don't really think of that much, but I think cities like New York maybe and European cities, it's very prevalent. The architecture, the whole thing in the Roman in the classical period specifically in Rome is you see a lot of stuff built off of the golden ratio, right? Which is idealized. Like these buildings are idealized for how you walk through them, and then or like how they're proportional, designed exactly for like the human being, right? And then you come over here, and the experience of cities is so different, right? Like L.A. and Miami compared to like Rome or Florence are very very different. They're just much more suburban, much more American in that way, right? Like I think in Rome there are places where you can have like houses that have yards, but it's very very like rare. The space usage over there is a little bit more like apartments and stuff like that. Like I grew up in an apartment building that was in the suburbs, and most of the buildings out there were like that. So I do find the discussion of architecture pretty interesting because it is something that we experience on such a intuitive level, right? That um, we can't necessarily always put our finger about it. Like I don't necessarily know why certain space makes me feel a certain way, but I know it makes me feel a certain way. I don't necessarily understand the science behind it every time. But yeah, it's also interesting because I started off more. I mean, I've always identified as a drawer, but I started off a lot more focused on conceptual work. But it's interesting to see, it sounds like you're abstracting to some degree from the real world, right? Like, because you're maybe referencing things that you saw earlier in the day, so you are drawing from actual things. So you're abstracting visual stuff, but it seems like there is a lot more like conceptual side of things might affect the decision making process more overtly than if you were just doing an abstraction of a chair or something like that. I keep using the chair as an example because that's what we used to learn abstraction. Like, they had us make an abstract piece of a chair, but does that make sense, the idea of like, instead of just making abstraction based on visuals, like which like on a visual element, you're codifying information. Are you following me?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think one of the easiest ways to describe what I do is I take something that happens in reality. Let's say it's a building,
Mm.
which originally was not a real thing. It was a drawing. So then I take it from reality, make it a drawing in my sketchbook, and then I put it together with whatever else is going on in my mind, and then
Mm.
it becomes abstract again because a drawing is abstract no matter what. It's
Yeah.
not a real thing.
Yeah.
And all art is conceptual. So at the end of the day, it's being taken from an idea into yet another idea, and it's sort of becoming more and more opaque as it gets to me. And the other thing
Mm.
that happens is, because the work is so interconnected, and the work is I've been making architectural based work since about 2008. There is a long history of architectural type drawing, and so things come back, and
Mm.
it's not conscious. Things like you were talking about, the patterning. I don't work with anything in my studio. The walls are white, and I make work. I don't Once the work is done, it gets put away, and I don't look at it ever again. Unless
Mm.
somebody comes for a studio visit, then I put things on the wall, obviously. But my concern is about the making of it. My
Okay.
interest is in making it. And then once it's done, it's like a kid or whatever. Like, it belongs to the world. It no longer belongs to me. What I have to say about it doesn't
Doesn't
really
matter.
matter,
Yeah.
because at some point I'll be dead. There won't be me to say anything about it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, if people that come to the studio or do studio visits or talk about the work key in on one of the things that I'm interested in, that's great. It's a
Yeah.
successful drawing then. Um, but I don't really concern myself too much with what happens after.
Are
I mean,
you
I'm also working on a very different, or seemingly very different, series of work right now. I'm drawing friends' penises,
okay?
and people are like, "These couldn't be more different." I say they're absolutely the same to me conceptually,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I'm interested in isolation. I'm interested in vulnerability, or uh, you know how much we reveal, how much we don't reveal. There's all of these things that I'm thinking about. I mean, visually they're very different, but
Mm.
conceptually I'm still concerned with the same thing. I mean, I made paintings about Grey Gardens while I was making architectural work while I was an undergrad, and again, they were concerned with exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Abandonment, going insane. Like, all of these things are in there, and it just comes out visually different.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. Well, cool, man. So, is there anything that you maybe wanted to talk about and then say before, like, that you thought about that I haven't been able to get out of you through questions? Like, you when you're, oh, I'm gonna be on a podcast. You think about something and then I don't ask about it, and then later you're like, damn, I didn't get to say that.
No, I mean, I think that anytime I've been interviewed or I've been on a podcast, I think that it is a marker of the time that I'm currently in.
Mm.
Um, I'll never listen to it, because I don't, it is not, I don't want to hear myself talk about it.
No,
Like,
I know.
it's, it's really, for me, I think if people are interested in what I'm doing, I'm always happy to talk about the work. And I
Yeah.
think about, where I am right now. And right now, the work is in a period of transition. And I think actually every time I've been interviewed or been on a podcast or something, the work has been in a state of transition.
Uh huh.
And it's a state of transition which, can be scary. because you're at a point where you're making a lot of failures. But I think that while you're making those failures, you're learning a lot of different things. And that's sort of the point at which I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very thankful for that, because I think that once you start hitting a specific stride or it becomes too easy, then you're just making product or you're just
Yeah.
making design. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
something that I definitely have zero interest in. I
Mm.
want the work to be difficult. I want the work to make me struggle. I want the work to make me think. And I want to find myself in sort of a labyrinth space that I have to find my way out of. And sometimes I fail at that, but I learn something from it. And I think that that is a very important part of being an artist and being in the studio.
Yeah. No, it sounds like you're very much attached to the practice. What do you show? Like, are you pursuing any? I mean, the way that I ask it that way because the way you describe just putting it away and not looking at it again. Are you? You're doing studio visits, obviously. So, are you showing it anywhere? Are you trying to show any of this stuff, or is this still more of a personal practice for you?
Oh, I mean, I show. I mean,
Okay.
it's not like crazy regular or anything. Like
Yeah.
I'm in a
Yeah.
summer show right now. I'm going to be in a show in LA in September, and it really is. I I shepherd the work as best as I can, but I'm not a person that's out there saying, "Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me,"
Hmm.
because that's not the kind of person I am in the world, and it doesn't feel authentic to who I am.
Hmm.
So, the studio visits that I have are not strategic. It's usually other artists, and some of the time it's artists that end up eventually, curating something or doing something. But I'm also, I work in the art world, so I'm also very friendly with dealers because
Yeah.
I've been working in a gallery since 2012. And so things have happened through that as well. But I am more of a person that is focused on what I'm doing in the studio. And, I do things like this, or, you know, if there are things that I find interesting to apply for, I will apply. But again, I'm just not the person that's out there like
Yeah. Yeah.
banging on the door saying, "Come look at me, come look at me." And maybe that's to my detriment, but maybe it's also
I don't know if it
to my
works out for.
betterment.
I don't know if come look at me works for anybody. Just
It can,
it can, I guess.
and it does
Yeah.
to a point,
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
also think for me, because the work is quiet in a lot of ways, it is not something that is flashy, and it takes time. And so I
Yeah.
think that, again, I think it is true to my personality and the way that I make work, and that's sort of the way that I function in the art world.
Yeah, yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, there's so many different ways of moving it. I didn't. I hope it didn't sound like I was asking with judgment. I'm just curious.
No, not at all.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, we talk to everybody here, and I think anybody who is able to make art regularly, and this goes to the audience, not obviously not to you, but anybody that can find the time to make art is a legitimate artist because you're fucking doing it, you know? I know that there's the question of like, if there's no audience, is it art and all of that, but on a very real level, if you are engaging in an art practice, it's hard to deny that you're making art, like I mean, and you could just be your own audience, but cool, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. I really did. Like, I'm sorry if I spent so much time asking you about New York, but you were just the person that seemed to know the most. So I really, really am grateful to you. Like, obviously, you see how little I know. And without asking somebody, I don't learn. So I really appreciate that. I really like talking about your work too. I obviously enjoy it. I think that we're it's like you said, you just use some words that I'm like, oh yeah, like we're sort of we're neighbors in our concerns, mostly that we're both drawers. And I think that lends itself to sort of a similar experience, like, right, like it's painters getting along with painters versus drawers getting along with drawers. Like, we're just obsessed with this thing that I think drawing is a little harder than painting.
But you can hide a lot in painting, and
Yeah.
people do hide a lot in painting because if you can't draw, you can still make a painting, and
Yeah,
you can tell
exactly.
when they don't know how to draw.
Yeah. But okay, anything that we can promote for you? Anything coming up? You had the shows in LA in September. Are you going to be in town for that?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm gonna. It's art fair week, and then that show opens in LA, and I know that I'm going to be absolutely exhausted after art fair week. So I am
For
not going
sure.
to make a 3 day trip to LA from New York.
You never know. Uh okay, so then anything that we can promote for you, that there's that show, what's that show called? Where is it?
It's going to be at Noon Projects. I don't know that they've titled it yet, but it'll. I
Okay.
think it opens on the 13th or the 14th of September.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, the 14th, I'm doing other places art first, so we got a double plug for that day. And then your Instagram is Nick Naber,
It
right?
is
It just
very easy.
it's so it's not Nabor, it's Naber.
Yes.
It's I just keep hearing myself say your name, and it sounds to me like I'm saying neighbor. So all right, and then cool, and thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars wherever you listen to us. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another guest and another topic. Oh, and we're working on merch if you guys want anything like that. So hopefully we'll have it ready for September 14th at other places art fair, and it'll be available for. I mean, it's not like it's not like I'm expecting it to fly off the shelf, but it's an opportunity for you guys to like shoot us $5 and get something in return if you get a chance, or if you're at all interested in supporting the show. So thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys, and we'll be back next week, like I said, with another guest and another topic that may or may not be art related.